from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.
At the Legislature today, as a measles outbreak makes national headlines, a Senate committee considered a bill to provide religious and medical exemptions for vaccinations. But after further discussion, the religious exemption is off the table. We'll talk about this and other health issues with the chairs of the House and Senate health committees on the Legislature today. Good evening, I'm Ashton Mara. Governor Tomlin today signed House Bill 2001, repealing the West Virginia Alternative Renewable Energy Portfolio Act. In a statement, the governor said, in 2009, when the legislature approved West Virginia's Alternative Renewable Energy Portfolio, the act had overwhelming support from business and industry. We understand economic drivers and factors change over time, and the act as it was passed in 2009 is no longer beneficial for our state. After it passed both houses of the legislature with overwhelmingly bipartisan support, I've signed House Bill 2001, repealing the West Virginia Alternative Renewable Energy Portfolio Act. The bill removes the requirement that power companies use alternative fuels and renewable energies to generate a portion of their electricity. 3 senators today removed their names from a controversial bill that would grant some children exemptions from immunizations. The original bill allowed parents to apply for both religious and medical exemptions from some shots, including those that fight measles, polio, and chickenpox. But changes came today after some concern from outside interest groups. Senator Mike Hall says he pulled his name because of a clerical error, but Senators Mark Maynard and Chris Walters say the bill itself was presented to them originally as only allowing medical exemptions. Walters used children with egg allergies as an example, but the two later found out the original bill also included a provision to allow for religious exemptions, an exception Walters says was concerning.
We need to keep strict requirements. I mean, we don't have the problems they have in other states. We don't have the outbreaks. However, there are some allergies that some people have that cannot allow them to have the shots, and we need to know that. We need to have a good system of looking at that and making sure we're not exposing our other youth to the possibility of a disease. So,
compared to the rest of the nation, West Virginia ranks high for the number of young school-age children who receive their vaccinations. State law requires immunizations to attend school, but also only allows for a strict medical exemption. Walters worries opening up the exemptions further could also open up vulnerable populations to disease.
I got a daughter that's going into kindergarten, and the last thing I want is her to have a chance to be exposed to measles or whatever disease is out there that could come to her and hurt her. And you have to look at it from another population as well. I have a friend that just went through chemo. Well, she can't have any vaccinations whatsoever for an entire year. Well, if she gets around a disease like that and it gets to her with her weakened immune system, that could end her life. So we have so many other populations, not just young children, but other populations that could really be affected by this.
The Senate Committee on Health took up the legislation, offering a committee substitute that removed the religious exemption completely. The bill keeps the medical exemptions in place, calling on parents and local physicians to prove, quote, the immunization of a child is medically impossible or improper. Instead, the committee substitute focuses on streamlining the exemption process. It removes the power to approve medical exemptions from local county health officers and gives them to the State Bureau for Public Health, where the state's chief health officer can assure the Centers for Disease Control guidelines are being met. But the state's new chief health officer, Dr. Rahul Gupta, says he's not sure the bill is necessary.
If this bill wasn't even before us, could you streamline the medical exemption and centralize the process?
Yes, Senator. It is our full intent to make sure that the inconsistencies that do exist in the system are eliminated, but they're eliminated in a way and a manner that does not put our children, our families at risk for disease outbreaks. So yes, it is both my priority and my intent to streamline the process. We believe that there is enough authority within the existing code to be able to do that with or without this piece of legislation.
Gupta told members of the Health Committee he has additional concerns with some provisions of the bill, like mandating certain dosage amounts and ages that are subject to change by the CDC. Stallings moved, and the committee members unanimously decided to lay over the bill until members have more time to look over the committee substitute and discuss its implications. Exemptions for vaccinations have been a hot-button issue this legislative session since a measles outbreak in California and subsequent states was first reported earlier this year. But that certainly won't be the only major issue lawmakers consider. Joining us tonight to discuss vaccines and other bills set to come before both chambers are the chair of the House Health Committee. Senator Ryan Ferns was invited to be here tonight but could not join us. So Delegate Joe Ellington, a physician from Mercer County, is here. He was first elected to the House in 2010. Delegate, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Let's start with that bill in the Senate. Now, is the House considering similar legislation?
The House has similar legislation. What we are looking at is having the Senate send their bill over to us first. That was kind of a gentleman's agreement from both chambers. We're trying not to duplicate everything, but let one work out the details and then have the other chamber finish it up.
I would like to ask you to react, though, to what Dr. Gupta had to say about the bill. He's saying this isn't necessary. I can make these changes that you need without this legislation.
Well, most likely, Dr. Gupta, we take him by his word. We think he can do that. In the past, though, there were inconsistencies with the local public health officials as far as granting different exemptions. I think the pendulum swung too far to one side. Looks like Dr. Gupta has corrected that. The concern that we have, though, is if Dr. Gupta is not in that same position years from now, we may not get the same reassurance. So that's where the legislature was acting on this.
As a physician, though, what is your position on these vaccines? Are they necessary?
Oh, yes, they are certainly necessary. We want to attain herd immunity. We want to maximize it as best as possible. So we're trying to actually strengthen the immunity in the state with this bill. We're trying to make sure that all the kids are properly vaccinated as best as possible. People that have questions about it, at least educate them as far as the benefits to vaccination. And we think in the long run that might improve the vaccination rate.
Let's move on to another bill that was supposed to be on the agenda for your committee today, but was taken off. And that bill would require a 22-week abortion ban. We've heard in the past there's been a lot of discussion about this 20-week ban. So can you first start by explaining the difference?
Yes, there are some differences. It's a matter of definition. This is considered a pain-capable bill where they're stating that the fetus can feel pain at a certain gestational age. Now, research studies look at 20 weeks from fertilization as where a fetus can experience pain. From the obstetrician standpoint or the provider standpoint, we look at gestational age from last menstrual period, and that corresponds to about 22 weeks. So the difference between 20 weeks and 22 is essentially the same thing. So getting that definition correct is the first thing we were looking at. The second part then was establishing that as what is called the pain-capable gestational age. So it's essentially 22 weeks from last menstrual period or 20 weeks from fertilization.
So then the difference between 22 weeks and 24 weeks, what some people call viability. Can we talk about that difference?
Correct.
And why the governor said the previous bill was unconstitutional because it wasn't at viability?
Right. Viability is when a fetus can survive outside the womb. And it's been generally accepted around 24 to 25, 26 weeks. So that's where most definitions have been set. With newer technology, medical technology improving, that barrier is starting to decrease toward the 22 weeks. And we have had cases where fetuses that were delivered at 22 weeks have survived. So that is consistent with where they're stating the pain-capable part.
So then this bill that says 22 weeks, Is it a political move to try to get the governor to agree to a bill and get a bill signed?
Well, with everything, there's probably politics involved in most bills. From my perspective, we're not making it political. We're looking at if the fetus experiences pain, then the state has an interest in preserving that life. And that's pretty much the basis of this bill.
Senator Manchin sent some letters last week to West Virginia lawmakers urging them to pass a prescription-only pseudoephedrine bill. This is something that we saw intense debate over last session. Are you all looking at any pieces of legislation to curb meth labs in the state?
Yes, we are. We did go through most of this last year with the prescription only. We found that most people were not in favor of that in the legislature. Delegate Schott and I proposed a kind of a hybrid model where we were requiring prescription only for people that may have had a higher suspicion of drug diversion or drug usage that would be diverting pseudoephedrine products toward methamphetamine. That required a prescription for those people that either had previous drug offenses or previous felonies. For the normal patient that is wanting to buy a prescription for a cold remedy, we wanted to make it so that they weren't penalized. So instead of penalizing everyone for the bad things of a few, we were trying to address the problem but not penalize the rest of the population. We also incorporated into that bill different safeguards as far as pediatric doses of pseudoephedrine, tamper-resistant dosages. We were also looking at continuing the NPLEX system that was supposed to track pseudoephedrine sales. And we've had good results from other states that seem to be cutting down on that.
So then you expect this year to also introduce this kind of hybrid bill?
Yes, that is one of the things we're looking at as far as targeting that so we don't hurt the normal customers.
Well, Delegate Joe Ellington, thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
More news from the legislature today up next. First, here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the Senate today.
Among the bills introduced in the Senate today, Senate Bill 392 to allow boards of governors of institutions of higher education more flexibility in the procurement and payment of certain expenses. Senate Bill 393, the governor's bill to reform the juvenile justice system. Senate Bill 395 to modify the definition of battery and domestic battery in order to conform with federal laws as a result of the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. Senate Bill 398 to increase the tax rate on eligible acute care hospitals and extend the tax's expiration date. Senate Bill 399 to clarify that hospitals owned or operated by nonprofit corporations, nonprofit associations, or local governmental units have only one governing body whose meetings shall be open to the public. Senate Bill 400 to allow employers that have as one of their primary purposes or objectives to discourage the use of tobacco products by the general public not to hire tobacco users. Senate Bill 402 to require the tax commissioner to include on the West Virginia personal income tax return a short survey asking the taxpayer for the top 3 preferences where the taxpayer's taxes should be spent and the bottom 3 least preferred preferences. And Senate Bill 405 to authorize qualified entities to access criminal history information provided by the Criminal Identification Bureau for use only for the purpose of screening employees, foster parents, adoptive parents, and volunteers, or persons applying for those positions. Up for passage in the Senate tomorrow, Senate Bill 284 to state the procedure when a chief law enforcement officer is required to certify the transfer or making of certain firearms. Senate Bill 312 to set a deadline by which candidates or their financial agents must file financial statements in order to avoid being disqualified as a nominee for the general election. Senate Bill 318 to amend the Wage Payment and Collection Act relating to the number of required pay periods in a month from once every 2 weeks to twice every month. Senate Bill 322 to remove the unnecessary requirement of a mandatory electronic recount of ballots in recounts. Senate Bill 323 to extend municipal home rule to other cities. And Senate Bill 326 to eliminate the campaign finance reporting requirement for candidates for delegate to a national convention. On second reading, Senate Bill 389 relating to license renewals and reinstatements for professional engineers.
A number of bills were up for discussion on the House floor today, from child welfare to the election of judges to the qualifications of the state labor commissioner. All of them passed to their next stages without much debate. Liz McCormick reports.
8 bills were on the House floor today. House Bill 2200 was the only one on third reading. This bill is to revise, rearrange, consolidate, and recodify the laws of the state relating to child welfare and juvenile disposition. Judiciary Chairman Delegate John Schott is the lead sponsor. He described the bill to be more user-friendly for those who have to deal with this area of law.
There have been complaints for many years over how difficult it is to work in this area and how it can lead to misinterpretations, misunderstandings. And this is an effort that this bill has got bipartisan support. It's got widespread support among those who need to be able to navigate these complicated provisions of law. And Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
House Bill 2200 passed 98-0. The next 5 bills were on second reading, the amendment stage. First up was Senate Bill 13, which has to do with the liability of a possessor of real property for injuries caused by open and obvious hazards. Delegate Schott proposed an amendment.
The amendment that has been passed in the Judiciary Committee to modify the Senate version, Senate Bill 13, basically recognizes a very limited exception to the open and obvious doctrine. And that is where the danger on the landowner's property is a violation of a law intended for the public safety, and that violation caused the injury, then in that narrow situation, the landowner is still responsible.
Schott's amendment passed, and the bill progressed to third reading. House Bill 2010 was up next. This bill relates to electoral reforms requiring the election of justices of the Supreme Court of Appeals, circuit court judges, family court judges, and magistrates to be on a nonpartisan basis. Delegate Tim Manchin proposed an amendment that would extend public campaign financing to circuit court judges. It's already in place for candidates for the Supreme Court.
That program has worked. As a matter of fact, we have a current Supreme Court justice now who sits in the chamber upstairs because of this bill. There was a pilot project at the time, which has now been made permanent for Supreme Court judges. The reason that I've offered this bill is because, quite frankly, the only real reason to have nonpartisan judges, or the only stated reasons, are 2. Number one, so that they're not beholden to anybody and they don't appear to have partiality after they've been elected. Number 2 is to cut down on the costs of election. However, if we miss this opportunity to extend the public campaign financing to those circuit court judges, we will leave in probably the greatest threat to the appearance of impartiality that there is, and that's direct campaign contributions.
Delegate Schott stood to oppose the amendment, but in good faith.
This is a good idea, and it's an idea that whose time may come, just not today. I'm going to speak against this amendment, not because I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's where we want to be at some point, but I'm concerned that it complicates a bill whose focus is to take the first step, and that is to make these judicial elections nonpartisan.
Delegate Manchin stood again to encourage the amendment be adopted.
We have an opportunity right here to do something good right now and not wait until later, until all other kinds of people weigh in and tell us all other reasons why the system won't work when in fact it already has.
Delegate Manchin's amendment was rejected 67-31, and House Bill 2010 moved on to third reading. Also up for passage will be House Bill 2217, relating to the qualifications of the Commissioner of Labor. The bill removes the term labor interests of the state and inserts language to require the commissioner to have knowledge and experience in employee issues and interests, including employee-employer relations. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Liz McCormick in the House.
Another election bill is on the legislature's agenda. Senators today approved a bill that repeals straight party voting, a ballot provision allowing a person to choose to vote for all candidates from one party instead of considering individual races. Members of both parties stood to back and oppose the legislation. Here's what a few senators had to say before the vote.
It could be construed as a partisan issue that negatively impacts the majority party. I mean, we have, I think it's fair to say, had benefited from this over the past couple elections cycles. And, but that's not the reason to continue a process. It should be, what is the right thing to do, regardless of partisan politics or regardless of who benefits from a particular method of voting. It is about what is the right thing to do.
I think it's a silly bill. I think we don't give voters enough credit. You know, voters who come into the booth and take the time out of their day, which we all encourage them to do, to go vote, know who they want to vote for. They know whether they can vote for every Democrat or every Republican, and we're simply going to force them to have to go down the entire list because we don't think they're considering every candidate. There couldn't be anything farther from the truth. I've had so many voters come up and say, you know, I'd vote straight Republican or I'd vote straight Democrat except for this candidate. And that happens all the time. All we're doing is getting rid of a bunch of tradition because we think it gives somebody an advantage. And, you know, that's unnecessary. What we need to do, as the senator from Jefferson said, is we need to find ways to encourage people to come back to vote, not find ways to discourage them from voting.
So this is a fairly large step, but it's not the big step, Mr. President. I want to remind everyone today that there's a much bigger issue that this bill does not tackle, nor does the nonpartisan election of the judges tackle that issue. And that issue is the influence of money in American politics. The influence of money in American politics, where the voter becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller in the shadow of huge money. A lot of it from PACs, out-of-state interests. It makes the voice of the average American citizen that much smaller. So although many of the citizens in West Virginia may have an opinion about this bill, I would urge us all, particularly those now in the majority of the party, and those in Congress, Mr. President, to give the American people back their voice and mute some of the effect of that huge money influence on our election, because that is going to be a problem more into the future as our voices as individual citizens in this state and this nation are muffled by a blanket of election money.
The bill passed on a vote of 25-8 with one senator absent. Only Democratic senators voted against it. Now here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the House today.
Among the bills introduced in the House today, House Bill 2568 to create the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, House Bill 2571 to authorize the West Virginia Commissioner of Highways to create a fund for pothole repair contributed to by private businesses or entities, and to provide for recognition of the contribution of the private donations at the site of the repair. House Bill 2573 to make English the official language of the state and require all state activities and records be in the English language. House Bill 2574 to amend the Above Ground Storage Tank Act to address and correct certain unintended consequences of the original enactment. The program is now focused on tanks with a capacity of 10,000 gallons or above within zones of critical concern of public water utilities. Up for passage in the House tomorrow, Senate Bill 13, to provide that a property owner owes no duty of care to protect against dangers that are obvious, reasonably apparent, or is well known to the person injured. House Bill 2010, to elect all justices to the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals, all circuit court judges, all family court judges, and all magistrates on a nonpartisan basis. And House Bill 2217, requiring that the Labor Commissioner has knowledge and experience in employee issues and interests, including employee-employer relations in the state. Among the bills on second reading, House Bill 2128, permitting individuals with concealed weapons permits to keep loaded firearms in their motor vehicles at the state capitol complex. And House Bill 2234, to require a court to permit a party in a divorce proceeding to resume using the name he or she used prior to the marriage.
This has been the Legislature Today. Tomorrow, we'll meet the chairs of the business committees. Each house has different names for them. Senator Tom Takubo heads the Economic Development Committee in the Senate. Delegate Carol Miller is the chair of the Small Business, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Development Committee in the House. They'll join us tomorrow. I'm Ashton Mara. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following:
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.